Hansard report been made for agenda items 5 and 6. And in terms of apologies, then we received apologies from Gary and Kayla. Any other apologies? No. Can remind members are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests at each committee meeting as applicable. Okay, draft minutes, pages 5 to 9 of the main pack. Members content their accurate records.
Okay.
Matters arising then. Can remind members that at the meeting on the 9th of December it was agreed that all declarations of interests by committee members in respect to the NAMA review will be provided at today's meeting, and a copy of these is at pages 11 to 14 of the main pack. In terms of table of requests, can refer members to this, which provides an update on any matters arising not covered elsewhere on the agenda, pages 15 to 17 for noting. Moving on then to the research briefing, can I refer members to the following papers. Letter to the committee chair from the Minister, page 19. The written ministerial statement at pages 20 to 30. Potential lines of questioning from Assembly Research on the draft executive budget, pages 31 to 44 of the main pack. The Assembly Research paper on the breakdown and allocation of the budget at 45 to 53. Web links at page 54. And in terms of your table of papers, there's a paper at pages 4 to 10 referring to DFP considerations of the executive budget 16 to 17. So can I welcome Colin Pigeon. Happy New Year, Colin.
Happy New Year, Chair.
Where do you get your ties at?
This was a Hungarian friend of mine sent it.
Ah, very good.
So, I don't know. Somewhere in eastern Hungary, I think.
Yeah, members don't have as interesting as ties as us.
It's funny, this one always gets a comment as well.
Okay, Colin, you want to kick us off with your paper?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Chair. Right, as you've just been running through, we've produced a number of papers. We've been quite busy over the last week or two, producing a number of briefings, and some of them are in your pack, some of them aren't. The ones that will be particularly relevant today are in your pack. That's the lines of questioning, the allocations. I've got the charts on the slide. The other two in the series that we produced, one is just it's a sort of technical note in relation to machinery of government changes, which is really about the reorganisation of the departments and the roles and responsibilities of accounting officers in relation to them and the guidance and how they should be seeking assurance about how the money is used and so on. So it's useful background information. And then paper one in that series is just a sort of up-to-date state of the economy briefing, really, which provides sort of the most up-to-date data on where we are in terms of labour market and other issues. So I will kick off. As usual, please stop me if there's anything that's unclear or you want me to go over again or I haven't covered.
Just help us with if they are on the documents or not, just so
Yeah,
is this on our computers?
I've got links. I think I've got a reminder to tell you when to look. Yeah.
So this first one, Colin, where is it number 19? Is it page 19, sure, or sorry, is it 31? No.
Sorry, this sorry, which one are you referring to?
Well, I've got. Is this item 4? Briefing from Assembly Research.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're going to start now, and there's several of them. You're going to start in the first one. Colin, just
I am going to. What I'm going to do is move through the PowerPoint, and at various points I'll refer to the other papers and just say there's more information in the papers. In particular, towards the end. Now, this one's in your tabled pack, which might be useful when the departmental finance director's in. Okay. So, what we'll do in today's presentation is briefly I'm going to sort of set some context. We'll look at what came out of the spending review, touch on the economic context which I mentioned. We'll talk a little bit about the machinery of government changes, present the administration's cost data, and then move on to talk in more detail about the budget. And I've got a number of issues that need to be raised specifically for DFP as a department, but also some cross-cutting issues, so we'll deal with both of those. So, you say, is everyone all right with the lights on, or would it be easier with the lights off, or what do you think? Can you see it okay?
I think it's
Not very well.
With the lights off. A little bit blurry.
Yeah, go.
Is that better?
Yeah.
It's better.
Is it? Right. So this chart really just shows the outcome of the spending review for the executive. The darker blue is the resource DEL, and the lighter blue is the capital DEL coming over this next period, 4-year period. And the Chancellor did also allocate capital for the following year, for 2021, to, I suppose, to enable a longer sort of planning period. Okay. Not an awful lot to say about this, apart from a very sort of bland observation that it's very flat. Now, once you take inflation into account, and if the Treasury or the OBR's projections are right about inflation, over the period it's something like 5.3% reduction in the resource DEL. Now, obviously, depending on what happens with inflation, that could go up or down a bit, but it's, in terms of cash, it's pretty much flat. Which, now I've just pulled out one issue here to highlight in terms of flat cash. This is a map that my colleague upstairs put together for me based on the latest NISRA population projections. So over the next 5 years, this is the projected increase in the over 85s. So if you look at the red, so the red, look at the red, I don't need to point them out, look at the red. And that's 26.23 to 29% increase in the over 85s. Now this is a good thing, obviously, if you're looking at the health of the population, but if you're looking at where costs, public expenditure costs are driven, it's really the two ends of the age scale.
Yeah, but what's the baseline figures for
well,
that population?
well, the thing is, you probably have a relatively,
yeah.
you know, but the point is that it's when people become very elderly or when they're born, and for the first few years of their lives is when they really drive costs, particularly in terms of health spending, but also in terms of social security and so on. So we can see that we've got a flat allocation of resources, but we've got this ageing population, which is going to obviously cause us some issues to be tackled with.
Just repeat that first figure, Colin. You said that the fall would be 5.5.
The Treasury said 5.3% in real terms. It's 5.3%.
So explain what you mean by real terms, please.
Real terms is when you adjust, when they allocate the resources in the spending review, it's done in terms of cash.
Okay.
Okay, and it's cash that the departments and the ministers have to manage.
Okay.
But when you're comparing money over time, it's useful to take into account inflation so that you're trying to compare the same amount. So the OBR produces projections on what inflation is likely to do over the next, I think they normally do a 4 or 5 year period. So they look ahead, and then, so if you can then deflate the cash figure for next year and the following years by relevant percentage, and it brings down your total to give you, in effect, what your cash is worth in the value of tomorrow's money, if you see what I mean.
You're going out to 2020, and you're saying by 2020 in real terms it's a reduction of 5.5%.
Yeah, the cash that your £10 million that you've got this year is worth 9.5 million.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's a reduction from this financial year to...
It's over the period. So yeah, from baseline to the end of the spending review period. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So my children laugh at me.
And see just in terms of background, see in terms of the past 5 years, what was the real terms reduction?
I had that in a previous presentation. I took it out because we were running. I ran through it with the Education Committee on Wednesday. We didn't have time. I think it was 8.8.
8.8.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's less than it was. And in terms of where Northern Ireland sits, we were towards the top. You know, a lot of the UK departments took much bigger reductions than that. The devolved administrations were sort of sheltered by the Barnett formula in terms of the way health was protected and education school spending. So the reductions that we received were less significant. I can send you information on that, or come back to you with information on that, because I've got charts on it. So just to move on to the characteristics then of the Northern Ireland economy. I mean, this is nothing new to any of you. We've got an imbalance between public and private sector. We don't have great growth, we haven't got good productivity, we don't have terribly good pay, and we're quite inactive. So we've got a kind of combination of fairly unpleasant economic conditions, really. But having said that, consumer confidence is very high, and it's much higher than the 5-year average. Now, quite why that is, I'm not sure the economists know, but consumer confidence is very significant in terms of driving household spending, and therefore it's always worth keeping an eye on that. So paper 1 of the series of 4 that we have produced is available. It's available in hard copy in the library, and it's also on the website if you want to have a look for the productivity data and so on.
Chair, there's a web link to that on page 54 of the main pack.
We're okay to move on? Oh, right, okay, thanks. Yeah, this chart just, the interesting bit, I suppose, just is to reinforce the public-private sector balance. So don't worry about that bit at the top, but this is in terms of just percentage of public sector employment of total employment, and you can see that we're sitting in Northern Ireland at just over a quarter. Now this will be changing, obviously, with the voluntary exit scheme to some degree, but compared to England, which is 16%, and Scotland and Wales are in between us. So you can see that, certainly in terms of jobs, we are obviously quite reliant on the public sector. Now, one of the things that the executive is doing, has been doing and will be continued to be doing through the voluntary exit scheme, is to allow people to leave and save on the pay bill. So this is from the ministerial statement. So we've got £200 million that could be borrowed to allow for voluntary exits next year. The draft, or the budget, allocates 1.17.6 million to various places, and the statement goes on to say that 25 million of that is going to be used for capital purposes and not for voluntary exit. So that leaves the remainder, which is going to be then up for bids in June monitoring. So if we look at the table, I hope you can see this all right. It's probably a little bit small. This is the table from the Minister's statement. Oh, you have the Minister's statement, actually. So this is table 3 towards the back of the Minister's statement. The observation here, really, is just that there's nothing down there for DFP. It's mostly education, the education department, teaching and non-teaching workforce. So there's a direct question, I suppose, there for DFP in terms of where is it sitting in terms of voluntary exit? How many staff have exited? Does it anticipate more staff exiting? Will it be bidding in June? Because I think that would be it'll be interesting to know in terms of how they're going to manage their budget for this coming year, and sort of the overall scheme. I think I was told you have a briefing coming up, I think next week, from the head of the civil service about the wider issues. But anyway, so my observation really there is just that there's nothing there for DFP, and it might be worth asking why there isn't. Has DFP already got rid of everyone who can go? Is everyone else
Could you just
critical?
clarify those figures, Colin? Does I understand? You said 200 million was allocated for the voluntary exit scheme.
Yep.
117 that's been allocated at the minute.
Yep.
There's around 50 will be available for bids in June monitoring, but not for bids to do anything other than voluntary.
No, it will be
Build something, no?
for 57 million will be available. Well, that's a good question, actually. I'll read you exactly what it says. This is page 5 of the statement. The latest indications are the full 200 million will not be required for VES in 16-17. It's proposed that 25 million of this funding be used for capital projects. This leaves some 57 million available for allocation from the PSTF in the June monitoring round. So that suggests that it would be used for voluntary exit. But I suppose if they didn't get the bids in June for the voluntary exit...
Read it out again, please. If you...
As the latest indications are that the full 200 million will not be required for VES-related schemes in 16-17, it's proposed that 25 million pounds of this funding be used for capital projects. This leaves some 57 million available for allocation from the Public Sector Transformation Fund in June monitoring.
Okay, sorry, okay.
So the reason I say it suggests it is just because it follows on from general information about the voluntary exit scheme. But again, that's probably one for the officials later. The fact that they've been able to set aside 25 million for capital purposes, obviously if they can't use this 57, or they don't need this 57 million for further voluntary exits after June monitoring, I'm sure they will be able to reapply it in the same way for capital. Any more questions before I move on? So, I referred a moment ago to the second paper, the one about the rules in relation to machinery of government changes. That's just it's the Treasury's term for reorganisation of departmental functions, really. Also, in this paper, which is in your tabled pack, section 1 just has some information on provisions and contingent liabilities. Now, to be honest, I wouldn't worry about it too much because the Department of Finance is not really changing. So it's more of an issue for the departments which are splitting up and knowing how much budget is going with which function and where's it going to and what liabilities is it carrying with it. But in relation to DFP, it's not really a significant issue. Perhaps what's more significant is the sort of governance arrangements around are the permanent secretary or the accounting officers following DFP's guidance in terms of ensuring they have the correct assurances about the budgets which are transferring and the appropriateness of any spend. I've included this chart on administration costs in the civil service because we've done a series of these briefings now, and this is really just an update. Across the civil service, administration costs are continuing to fall. That's the departmental position. So you've got an overall drop of just over 8.5%, and in terms of DFP, it's 6.25%. They have fallen. So there's a specific chart just of the pattern of DFP's administration spend in the tabled paper. I suppose so you could say, well, okay, DFP's fallen slightly less than average. Is it worth asking about? But bear in mind that DFP has the highest administration spend because of its responsibility for the shared services, HR Connect and the payroll and all of those things. So I shall move on actually into the allocations from the budget. In terms of resource spending, we've got allocation to these new 9 departments. Now, this is something actually that occurred to me after the papers have been in discussion with somebody, but the new departments don't exist yet, and the department's bill hasn't been passed yet. But once, assuming it is, and it becomes an act, and then following the election, the 9 departments will then come into being in their new form. But up until that point, the current departments still exist, and when you are voting on the budget bill, which is coming up soon, there will be a vote on account, which is essentially sort of an advance of cash for the start of the year. That will be made to you can't vote that to departments that don't exist, so it will be made to the current departments. So it's just a question about how then the legal position, I suppose, for that money translates to the new structure, and whether there's any kind of accountability risk in the interim period between the end of this financial year and the coming into being an operation and function of the new departments. Again, that's one for the officials later. I'm sure they'll have they have legal advice or something on that, so they'll be able to explain it. But it's just a slight concern that there may be a risk there about one accounting officer being responsible for money up until, May, say, but they're not. In effect, there's nothing in the budget for that period. To move on specifically to talk about the allocation, the new Department of Finance will have 140 million. It's only a 1.4 million pound drop, I think, on this year, according to DFP's own paper. Yes, that's right. So it's minimal. And they have raised some points in their paper, which I'm sure you'll pick up with them later, about the pressures that gives for them. In essence, it's a very small reduction for DFP, but they have various pressures. When we go to look at capital, again, the Department of Finance isn't a big spender in terms of capital allocation. One thing that I would point out here is that there are the two pink boxes there relate to central allocations to central funds, which means that it as yet hasn't gone to a department. There's a slide coming about central funds, which we'll talk about. The other important thing to note about this capital allocation, not so much for DFP but for the other departments, is that these allocations here, shown in this pie chart, include money for flagship projects. There was a separate table in the statement for flagship projects. Now, this money here is not additional, it's from the allocations. So that's particularly important, I think, if you are DRD, because there's quite a lot of money here which has already been allocated by the executive for various priorities. So if you're the new DRD minister, your flexibility to manage your own capital budget is constrained. Okay. And I don't think DFP has any real involvement in any of those capital projects. Financial transactions capital has been a particular interest to this committee, but mainly because it doesn't seem to be working all that well, and there's been an awful lot of money allocated, brought back in, reallocated. A lot, in this case here, we've got 50% has been allocated for next year to the Northern Ireland Investment Fund, which we still don't know how it's going to operate. That's mentioned in, there's a number of questions in the lines of questioning briefing about that. But, where are we with that? What's happening? I'm sure when that fund was first envisaged, it was supposed to be up and running already, I think, or very close to it, and it seems to be kind of slipping and slipping. I just wanted to highlight, this is June not June, sorry. This is from the Minister's November, I'll get it there in a minute, November monitoring round statement, which this is the point of this, is to highlight that this is money that was returned by departments in the financial transactions capital this year, so they've been unable to use that. And it was then subsequently reallocated. So in November, the executive allocated 73.4 million of ring-fenced financial transactions capital, and I would just be interested to know, are we going to find then at the end of this financial year that has to be reallocated again or rolled over to next year if the Treasury will allow us to do that, or whether this money will actually start to be operational, if you like.
No, it's just what's the quantum of the, you want to just go back to the first slide on the financial transaction capital. What's the quantum there? Is it 200 million? Is it 100 million? Talk about the
It
percentage.
is, say, 55, 85, 95, 112-ish?
So around that, we're trying to allocate 112 of
Something like that,
FTC
yeah.
in
Yeah.
1670,
Yeah,
and most going into the investment fund.
yeah, half of it, basically, yeah.
Colin, just on that one, there were other monies supposed to be voted into that fund, over, it must be 2 to 3 years now.
Mm-hmm.
We've also had the assurance that no money's been returned to the Treasury, so I'm just wondering where that money is.
I think from when I was looking back over the monitoring statements, that they had to take money out of the allocation to the fund and give it to departments because the fund wasn't ready to go. Now, whether that's the same money as, I don't know whether that, for example, is the money that went to the DOE for the waste project, which they've now handed back because was there a planning issue on that? I can't remember. But it's certainly very difficult to track.
But it goes back more than that year.
It does, yeah. It goes back to the previous year, yeah.
You're not saying, Colin, that was in an investment fund for even hypothetically, or perhaps for waste. You're talking about the investment fund,
That's
aren't you?
right, that's what's been used for, you say, but it doesn't exist, so where's the money?
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a job for asking others.
Thank you.
Yeah. Another issue that I wanted to highlight is central funds. That's it. Now I've got a specific note here to say that recognition should probably go to Mr. Cree over there for this, because it's something that I know there have been a number of questions asked about central funds, and this is the first time that I recall having seen a budget statement actually specifically with a table in it that said central funds. So that's a transparency victory there, perhaps. The reason for looking at this is there's a lot of money there. There's 115 million. That's that if you add together the cost of running the assembly plus the new executive office, I don't think it comes to quite 115 million. So this money's being held in the middle, and a lot of it we're not sure on how it's going to be used. So you've got dealing with the past, that's that green section, funding for addressing paramilitary activity, and the tax credit funding, which I think is to be determined by Professor Everson's project. So you've got all that section there that at this time we don't know quite what the mechanism is going to be for delivering that expenditure. These other things are a bit more familiar: Shared Future, Delivering Social Change, the Change Fund. They've been around for a while, so the means for distributing those is at least known. So there's a bit of uncertainty around that, and I think it would be good to get the officials' position on when they think these various decisions will be taken to allow that money to be used. Another issue, just before we sort of, this is really a number of budget issues that have come from they're relevant to the budget specifically for this committee, but not maybe so much for the others. But the Fresh Start Agreement said that the UK government would fund 25 million to enable the Department for Communities to try and reduce fraud and error. That 25 million has been allocated this year, or for next year, sorry. And the point of this slide really is just to highlight that although this is from the Fresh Start Agreement, that there's a projection that that money can be recouped by reducing fraud and error, and perhaps be spent on health, work and wellbeing interventions, or hiring unemployed and long-term unemployed. Those are good projects, good aspirations, but if these savings or this additional funding do not materialise, how will those things be funded, is the question really. Because is just an extract from the CNAG's report on the SSA's account, Social Security Agency's accounts 1 year. It says, I recognise there is an inherent risk of fraud and error in the administration of a complex benefit system which would make it difficult for SSA to reduce the estimated rate of fraud and error further from its current level, particularly because of potential welfare reform changes. So essentially that's just highlighting that it's been noted that it's not easy to materialise these savings. And in fact, EAC in Westminster have published a couple of reports which say similar things. DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, didn't make its target, and in fact, despite the rollout of universal credit, it still thinks fraud and error will be 5.8 billion in 2021. So that's just a bit over half the Northern Ireland block in fraud and error for DWP's budget. And I thought this was quite interesting. HMRC, so that's Revenue and Customs, has reduced fraud and error, but it doesn't understand how it did it or how much further it can go. So that's one of my favourite quotes. Actually. But the point of this is just that, you know, if the executive is banking on getting additional money from reducing fraud and error, it's not easy. So in terms of key strategic budget issues, cross-cutting budget issues, I suppose, the lines of questioning paper,
That's a page.
pages 31 to 44 of your main pack, has a whole load of questions under these different headings, so I don't propose to run through them all, you know. There's also some bits from the spending review, particularly around the statement of funding policy, that I just want to highlight to you now quickly because they're relevant to work this committee's done over a number of years. The first one being, there's just an extract from this committee's report on the operation of the Barnett formula. And just to remind you, because I'm sure you don't remember all these things in absolute detail, you recommended that the Treasury should publish data on Barnett consequentials and require that the statement of funding policy is subject to approval by the devolved governments, increase clarity on arrangements for block grant adjustments, and improve the intergovernmental machinery, really, in terms of the UK devolved administration relationships. So just to highlight here that these are extracts from the two statements of funding policy. That's the previous one at the top from 2010, which talks about when the decision is taken about whether a programme is UK-wide or England only, which affects our consequentials. And if you look carefully, in 2010, there was consultation between the devolved administrations, UK government, and the territorial secretaries of state. They have now gone, and we have consideration by Treasury ministers and their counterparts in the devolved administrations. So there's been a change there. You know, I went through the whole statement looking for changes, and there's not that much change across it, but I thought that one might be of particular interest to you there, because actually, I think in constitutional terms, this was almost the UK government agreeing with itself, its own ministers, whether these things were right or not. So the removal of that, I think, is probably a good thing for the devolved administrations, even if in practice it doesn't make a huge difference.
Is there any indication of, you know, how much from Barnett consequentials is in the budget and where it came from?
No, because they haven't. This is the victory, but what you haven't got is the open sort of publication of data and so on, that makes it that makes it clear where the consequentials have come from. I mean, the whole budget essentially is consequentials because that's how it's created, but there's nothing specifically that says this came from health, this came from education.
But we know that there is benefit from Barnett consequentials in it, but we can't trace them.
When the spending review occurs, that the Northern Ireland allocation is calculated by looking at what the Chancellor allocates to the UK departments and then applying the Barnett formula to those changes. So that's how the block, if you like, is essentially created, or the change to the block. So to say there's benefit when you're looking at a flat cash or in real terms reduction is possibly pushing it a little bit. In effect, on the other hand, I suppose you could say because health and school spending were protected, that means that our reduction in Northern Ireland was less than it would have been otherwise. But on the other hand, there was an allocation to defence, additional spending on defence, which is not comparable with Northern Ireland, so we don't benefit from consequential funding in relation to that.
Okay.
In terms of tax devolution, another issue that this committee's been following for a while, the spending review documents didn't give an awful lot of information in terms of how it would operate, and it really said that the UK government remains committed to devolving corporation tax to here, subject to the Northern Ireland Executive demonstrating its finances have been put on a sustainable footing. Now, certainly the Executive, I'm sure, will argue that the budget for 16-17 demonstrates it's been put on a sustainable footing. So if the UK government agrees with that, then presumably things will continue to move forward. Now, I just pulled out a quote from Jerry Holtham, who some of you will remember gave evidence to this committee in relation to Barnett inquiry. He's basically said the key issue hasn't been clarified, so there's still a lot of work needs to be done, and that's about the reduction in the block grant in relation to the devolved tax. Now, he's talking specifically about income tax there, but also VAT. They're very relevant for Scotland and Wales, not relevant for here at the moment, but certainly corporation tax is. And I haven't attributed that actually, but this bottom quote, it's actually from Alan Trench, who also gave evidence, and he summed it up by saying we've learned nothing about how the UK will operate with further fiscal devolution. So the Chancellor didn't take the opportunity that he perhaps had to clarify what the future shape of the UK funding system will be.
What is the issue in Scotland? Because I can understand the issue here of corporation tax is reduced and more people are employed, hopefully, that unfortunately the income tax from those people go to London rather than us, and VAT receipts from increased productivity and production of more goods and so on would also go to London. And you're saying that hasn't been resolved, but the position of London at the minute is that those revenues would accrue to them. We obviously that's still under discussion. We would dispute that. And when you say in terms of income tax, and our friends in Scotland weren't given everything they wanted, but they were given the right to strike an income tax rate. Did they have the same problem with that they weren't getting all the income, or?
Well, the issue is, I think if you remember back to the evidence, that the issue was it's easy enough to reduce the block grant in the first year or two.
Okay.
But the further you get from the point of devolution, the harder it is to say how different are we from the position we would have been at had we not had devolution. So you have to run this sort of counterfactual calculation of what your income tax would be over a period of years, and then look at what it actually is, compare the difference between the two, and then take that off the block. And the same sort of system would apply to corporation tax. And from what I remember of what the evidence said was that, yeah, okay, that makes perfect sense to start with, but the further you get from the point of devolution, the more spurious that sort of difference is likely to be, because you have less certainty about where you would have been had you not devolved it.
And this committee, Chair, has had no real insight into those discussions that are continuing.
Chair, just in terms of the committee's report in the Barnett formula identified a potential anomaly between the treatment of corporation tax, the secondary round effects, as they're known, here, and income tax in Scotland, where the Smith Commission included a no detriment principle that seemed to literally, if read literally, seemed to imply that those would be taken into, all the factors would be taken into account. So the committee identified that issue in its report, and I don't think there's been any real response to that as such.
Just wanted to ask Shane then as well, but in terms of, there's obviously negotiations going on at the minute between DFP and Treasury in London in relation to corporation tax, and we're committed that it's affordable. We want to introduce a lower corporation tax rate from April 2018, but it remains wholly unacceptable for all of us. I think that those secondary benefits you referred to, Shane, should go to London. But is this committee being given any insight into those discussions? That's just quite between now and the end of the mandate. I mean, do you know how they're going? Because the absolutist position of the London government just doesn't make sense. We can't surely accept that that if we start employing more people, that all those benefits go to the income tax benefits go to London. But we're not giving any insight into that, Shane.
Well, there's scheduled briefings from DFP over the coming weeks on those
Bring it up then.
issues. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We just move on. I'm conscious of the time, actually. So, in terms of the budget process itself, we all know there have been a number of factors which have led to squeeze in the way it's worked. Not least being the Stormont House Fresh Start talks process. But irrespective of that, actually, the timing of the UK spending review is much later than it normally is. That still would have caused difficulty in terms of the timing, because really DFP had very little time between the spending review announcement and Christmas to come up with any kind of proposals. So the executive has agreed to a one-year budget plan, and there are a couple of hints then in statements which will come up in a minute, but that there will be a multi-annual, multi-year budget process following the election. And I just wanted to also point out that this time around, both the Northern Ireland Assembly Commission, the Audit Office and the Ombudsman budgets have been, well, it says exempt or partially exempt, and that's one of the questions I think perhaps for the DFP officials is on what basis is there a partial or a total exemption for those budgets. But now that's a change in practice, because the executive in the past has been cutting those independent bodies' budgets, and this time didn't do so. So this is just in relation to the multi-annual budget. The Minister referred in November to a longer term budget, which was then December described as a multi-year budget for 17-18 to 19-20, so that's a 3-year period. So I suppose there's a number of questions there that are important in terms of scrutiny. Will that multi-year process be undertaken fully, appropriately, in terms of consultation with the Assembly and other key stakeholders? Is there to be a strategic pre-draft budget consultation phase? That's something that this committee pushed for hard a number of years ago, and work sort of moved on. But I think I would be also interested to know, how does the Minister see the progress on the Memorandum of Understanding between this institution and the Executive in terms of how budget processes will work in the future? How's that going to be pushed forward? Because it had a bit of momentum and then it stalled. So I think, I don't know whether this committee will produce a legacy report for the end of the mandate. That's certainly the previous practice. That's possibly something that needs to be picked up then. Oh, no, I can't say that. That the committee might consider picking up then. And the reason for that is the Open Budget Survey identified 6 factors that diminish the strength of the legislature in relation to the budget. Having a short time to look at it, having little ability to amend it, the executive being able to move money from one place to another without a vote or formal approval, the executive's ability to spend extra money without the Assembly okaying it, and the executive being able to spend contingency funds without the Assembly approving it. So all of those things, I would say, to a greater or lesser degree, apply to the Assembly. So it's an issue that will continue to arise. And the last one was whether the legislature has an internal research capacity, which we do to a degree. so it's less important. So to sort of sum up, I've just that last slide is really just pulling out the points from the lines of questioning paper in your main pack for DFP officials about DFP's own budget. I suppose those questions. Now they have answered some of them in their paper that they produced a few days ago, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of points about that briefly. So this is from DFP's paper on its own budget. They've said that they have a limited amount to allocate to new priorities, and estimated that 8 million of spending identified will not be funded. But what it doesn't seem to do is tell you what that 8 million of funding relates to. So I'm not. So I'm sure the officials will be able to give you some sort of clarity. Although how much they'll be able to do so in advance of getting a new minister, I'm not sure. I mean, a new minister post-election rather than the new minister to take us up to the election. Paragraph 9 of that paper, it's likely that discretionary maintenance expenditure will not be delivered and some elements of shared and common good services will need to be ceased or recharged. It's just a straight clarification. I just don't know what it means, I'm afraid. And I think the committee certainly has a right to ask for more information about that. And then I think there was a final point just about the capital spending plans. Now they've given some sort of indication that, okay, they're about 20 million short of what they wanted for capital. So they have said that some things will be able to go ahead, but then obviously there will be other things that won't be able to go ahead. And it's really, when you look at the things that they're perhaps suggesting won't be able to go ahead, like the reform of property management, there are obviously implications not just for next year, but for future years in terms of the executive's resources going forward across the board. You know, so that one possibly is an issue of concern. And with that, you'll be glad to know we're finished.
Thank you. Very useful.
If there are any further questions, I'll take them now. So I've thrown quite a lot of paper at you as well. There are, in this paper, there are various issues raised towards the end that hopefully will help you.
There's one question where you want to come back on, just about the possibility of an oil dividend. I've heard it called, Colin. Oil prices collapsing. Thankfully, in terms of domestic budgets, but also in terms of business budgets, but in terms of government, out of our 10 billion plus budget, how much of that actually goes on heating and fuel and fleets of buses to bring people to schools and so on? And do you expect that that might give people a little bit of space? Because you talked there a 5.5% drop in real terms in our budget between now and 2020. I wonder if the fall in oil, none of us can predict whether it will continue to be at $30 or $40 a barrel in 2020, but I wonder, is there a little bit of space there, and our departments already getting to feel that benefit of that oil dividend, and how we might be able to find that out?
I'll have to come back to you on that, because I just don't know. I don't know if, for example, the Central Procurement Directorate has a sort of heating contract across the board. I'm not sure, or whether it's patchwork. I don't know, and how flexible those things are, and how responsive they are to price changes. I just don't know. So I will come back to the committee on that.
Okay, members, any other questions?
I wouldn't like to be depending on the oil, but no, it can change very quickly. Just one me quickly, that last bit, Colin, you had there talked about property management. You know, we have the asset management unit, which really hasn't done an awful lot yet. I wonder, is that another name for it, or is it now lost its role?
The reform of property management is the title of the project, but I think that's probably taken forward by the asset management unit. I think they're the people that do it.
It's interesting. Anyway, we'll follow that up.
Something to follow up on, just
Thanks, Colin.
Okay, Colin.
Other questions?
Excellent presentation, as always.
Thank you. Sorry for keeping you longer than I was supposed to. Oh.
members can seek agreement the research papers are published on the committee web. Refer members again to the papers of agenda item 4, in particular research papers on page 31 of your main pack and page 4 of your table pack, and members may wish to draw on them and their question of officials at these next 2 items. Moving on then to the departmental briefing. Refer members to the documents of agenda item 4. And just wait the witnesses. Just to clarify, members, this is for the overall budget for all the departments. The following session will be about the BFP budget in particular.
Morning.
Morning. Happy New Year.
Sorry?
Happy New Year.
And to you too.
Hope you had a good break. Mike, do you want to make some opening comments before we go to questions?
Okay, Chair, yes. Very briefly, Chair, just to say that the construct of this 16-17 budget was really a rather unique exercise, and there were 3 main variables that determined that. The first one, obviously, was the political agreement, the Fresh Start, on the 17th of November. The second factor at play was the Chancellor's spending review announcement on the 25th of November, with the financial envelope for Northern Ireland set out. And then thirdly, the fact that we had to construct a budget for 16-17 that factored in the move from 12 departments to 9 departments. So 3 very, very significant factors that had to be accommodated within a very, very tight timescale. As you know, the Fresh Start Agreement asked the Executive and the Assembly to have a budget concluded by the end of January, so it was a significant challenge for ministers and officials. And as I say, it's been completed in that there is now a single year 16-17 budget, and as the Minister said in her statement, the significance of that is that it provides a stable platform for the new incoming Executive and Assembly to consider and construct a 4-year budget during this summer. But as I say, the financial outworkings of the 16-17 budget at a very high level. On the capital side, quite a benign settlement, I think, in real terms of growth of about 3%. And on the resource side, obviously things are significantly tighter, with the real terms cut in 16-17 of 0.8%. So that's a very, very quick canter through the framework.
In terms of your own view, how challenging is the next financial year going to be?
Is how challenging is 16-17 going to be? On the capital side, I don't think, to be honest, there's a problem. I think that the Executive has been able to, for example, signal commitments to the flagship projects beyond 16-17. It shows that there is a significant capital envelope there for this Executive and the new incoming Executive to play with. So I don't think there's a problem really on the capital side. On the resource side, I think 16-17 is a lot better than, if you'd asked me that question 2 months ago, I would have said pretty grim. The 16-17 budget's been constructed. There's no overcommitment to be cleared in June monitoring. There are significant resources allocated to, for example, the voluntary exit scheme. That's going to generate significant savings for the new 9 departments, and that should help alleviate some of the pressures that the new 9 departments will face. But it's still a very, very tight settlement, and during monitoring for the new Executive, they're going to have some very, very difficult and challenging decisions to take.
Now, obviously, this is a process that we haven't went through before, and there hasn't been, as the Minister herself acknowledged, the normal consultation protocols that we would have had. So in light of that, what opportunity is there for this committee or the other Assembly committees to influence any changes in terms of the draft budget?
Well, yes, you're right. This was complete deviation from best practice in terms of consultation. But the external circumstances dictated what had to be done. As you know, we normally in DFP have a series of extensive engagements with key external stakeholders. We had started that, and I think Joanne and Jeff had some engagements with various organisations in December, but by no means replicated the process that we would normally follow. The key issue now really is for the departments, now that they have their budget envelopes set. Key issue now is for the departments to engage with our committees and take from them what their sense of priorities are. The new incoming ministers for the new 9 departments in June monitoring will have significant discretion in terms of reallocating resources and capital. So that provides a perfect opportunity for the new ministers in the new departments to take on board the representations that are made, for example, from the various assembly committees.
And just in terms of that migration from 12 to 9, how and when will that take effect in budgetary terms, and how much transparency will there be in terms of the movement of budgets vis-à-vis the functions?
Right, well, it's obviously quite a complex task, both in terms of the numbers and also in the legislation. Joanne, do you want to
Yeah.
take the members through it?
The budget 16-17 was constructed on the basis of the 9 new department structure. In order to reach that position, we engaged with the finance teams and departments, and they actually split their 15-16 opening position across the various functions and identified those functions that were transferring and those transferred to the new departments, and that formed the starting point for the budget 16-17 position. So that has sort of set the position for the new departments going forward. Of course, there is the period at the beginning of the financial year where the 12 departments are currently in place, and they will continue to operate until such times as after the elections the 9 new departments, the departments bills is, and the transfer functions order is agreed. For that period, the departments will be working on the basis of the vote on account for 16-17, which will go through this assembly shortly, and that will be on the basis of the current 12 department structure, and in the same way as normal, will be based on a percentage of their 15-16 spring supplementary estimates position. Departments will draw down cash on that basis and continue to spend money on the functions on the 12 departments basis, but DFP will be monitoring that drawdown of cash and be comparing it to previous years and making sure that there's not excessive amounts drawn down, that everything appears to be in line. Once the new departments come into place, the cash that is drawn by the current 12 departments will be identified by function and will be transferred to the 9 department structure, so as we're ensuring that the budget position is maintained.
So the period from the beginning of April to the 15th of May is very much a transitional period, as departments migrate their budgets from the 12 to the 9.
As the Minister pointed out herself, the late date of the Chancellor's spending review obviously added further time pressure to the local budget process, and it is something of concern to me that when you're trying to reach agreement on a number of financial issues, I suppose on a cross-party basis as well, in local context, then all of a sudden there's another variable that's thrown into the mix in the middle of the financial year. So has there been any feedback provided to Treasury about how they can do things better without upsetting the apple cart in terms of our local way of doing things?
Yes, back I think at the beginning of the summer when we first realised the date of the spending review, you know, all 3 devolved finance ministers did register their concerns with the Chancellor about the implications for the devolved administrations in terms of progressing their budgets in effectively a window of about 8-9 weeks. Very, very tight. So the concerns were made at ministerial level to the Treasury.
And was there any response?
Well, basically, you know, the Treasury have their timetables as well, and the Chancellor was adamant he wanted to do a budget or a spending review announcement before the Christmas time, so it was dictated really by the Chancellor and the UK Government's requirements.
The Minister pointed out as well that the draft budget contains no level of overcommitment for the first time in many years. You said that yourself. And given that overcommitment was a tool for avoiding underspend, what assurances are that the overall year-end underspend will not exceed the budget exchange scheme limits?
Well, as you know, on the resource side, the Executive can carry somewhere in the order of about 50 million into 16-17 and roughly about 12 million on the capital side. What's happening now on an almost daily basis is that the DFP supply teams are engaging with their departments to monitor the actual allocations and spend in the remaining weeks of this financial year. If there is any possibility of us exceeding our budget exchange scheme totals on either the resource or the capital side, we can reallocate money within the remaining weeks of this financial year to departments that can spend it, for example through the urgent procedure route. So at the minute we don't have that concern at the minute on either resource or capital. The key issue obviously is that when the Executive did leave the November monitoring round, it was overcommitted by, I think, 10 million on the resource side and 15 million on the capital. So that was built in as basically a buffer to make sure there wasn't a pressure in terms of exceeding our limits on the budget exchange scheme.
And in terms of the memorandum of understanding that was in development between here and the executive and trying to address some of the issues that this committee has had in the past, I mean, it seems to have hit the rock somewhat in recent times. Is that going to be a priority again for the department?
It is, and certainly something that, you know, as officials, we would point out to the new finance minister, something that needs to be progressed. Obviously, you know, as the previous finance minister did say, you know, the big unknown, and it materialised in November, was timetables. The MOU sets out an ideal for, you know, progressing a budgetary process. The experience in November and December was a significant deviation from that. The MOU would not have worked in those circumstances. But obviously, when we get to the stable platform that the previous Finance Minister refers to this summer, that's obviously a window of opportunity to progress and sign off on that MOU.
Okay, members, questions?
Just that date, April the 1st to May 15th. May 15th, you said. Why May 15th? Is that the date that the new assembly comes? Or I think that's a Sunday, so it's at the 16th.
Well, it's the 16th day, whatever the date in May is when the transition occurs.
So that's the day that the election's on the 5th, I think, but the new assembly sits on that Monday. So that's the day the new department would be triggered. Or would
The date's specified in the transfer of functions order.
Yeah, I think the date has to be determined, but it'll probably be over the weekend that the
So
legislation.
those who are interested in standing and are elected, they would come back to 9 departments.
Yes.
And then whatever finance committee would be.
And 9 committees, and
But just one finance committee, one finance department.
Yes.
Future.
Chair, just on that one, so going back, Mike, to the vote on account, will that be then for 12 departments and 9 departments?
No, just for the 12 departments. We took advice when we were looking at this from the Office of Legislative Counsel, and they recommended that the vote on account is for the 12 departments.
Right, so that's time bound then, that
No,
vote on account?
that will be in the normal basis, and what happens is when the departments bill and the transfer of functions order go through, that transfers the cover from the 12 departments to the 9 departments on the back of that legislation, which means it covers the 12 departments from the 1st of April until the department's bill transfer of functions order
So
goes
it's in 3
through, and then it
steps.
transfers to the new departments, and it will cover the new departments until such times as the main estimates are
So it's in
progressed.
2 steps then, really? It's 12 departments up to whatever the date is in May, and then from the end of May to for the middle of May, we'll call it. Usually it covers up to June, doesn't it?
It's
in June or
July by
July.
the time we get royal assent. through.
July?
Yeah.
So then that period will be covered for the 9.
9, yeah.
Yes.
So how will we be able to work that out when we get the book? Will it be set out? Will it be 2 sets of figures in it?
Well, the vote on account, you won't have the level of detail. You'll only have the 2 schedules for the cash and the resources, and that will be in the 12 department basis. And as is normally the case, it'll just be on a percentage of the 12 departments' 15-16 position. When you get the main estimates, which has the level of detail, that will be on the 12 department basis.
9
department basis, sorry.
Okay, I think about that. Yeah, it'll be interesting.
In terms of the financial transactions capital, obviously about half of that is allocated to the NI Investment Fund. Can you give us a sense of where that is going to go now and an update, because it is not progressing as swiftly as we would have liked?
Certainly, Chair. Well, I'm conscious of the fact that you have, I think, officials coming in next week to give you a detailed briefing specifically on that. But just to say that work is progressing very, very well between DFE officials and officials from the European Investment Bank. There was some delay introduced while we needed clarification on the procurement of EIB to take forward the feasibility study. That's now been clarified and works well advanced. The intention is that the fund will be created looking at 4 specific sectors: urban regeneration, energy efficiency, telecoms and social housing. But as I say, the guys next week will walk through the detail of each of those schemes and the type of projects that they envisage will be eligible for funding from the investment fund.
Just, I mean, in terms of procurement, what department's going to have overall responsibility for
DFP will have overall responsibility, but effectively once the fund is up and running, it'll be managed by the EIB as the fund manager. The European Investment Bank will take responsibility for the discharge of the funds within that.
I just sort of come back on that one too. This fund has now been in the process, been set up for, is it 3 years now?
I think it was first
Wearing on to it.
considered about 2.5 years ago, yeah.
There was money voted to that, FTC money's voted through the years. Where is that money now?
It's been reallocated out. Well, it's gone to a range of sources, you know, it's been all
Has it been
detailed.
spent? That's the point.
It's all been spent, not a single penny of it has been surrendered. So, for
All
example,
that money surrendered out of it.
and reallocated. So, yes, so
Reallocated again?
yes, reallocated again. So, for example, in recent weeks, it became clear that there was some FTC available that could be used, and in the budget document for 16-17, you will see how it's been recirculated. In 15-16, late in the day, we had some FTC became available, and I think it's gone to social housing, co-ownership scheme.
Co-ownership schemes.
Co-ownership scheme. So, you know, it's been recirculated. The minute we know that in DFP that FTC is available to be recirculated, we facilitate that.
But at the year end, I remember being told on at least 2 occasions that X million pounds would go to the investment fund.
Yeah.
But obviously it didn't do that.
Well, there was an intention, I think it was about 40 million, wasn't it? It was supposed to initially go, Jeff, in 15-16.
Yeah, in 15-16 there was a small amount. I think it was maybe about
11,
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll start this, you know, the
Uh-huh.
16, 17 years, the first year there's going to be actually FTC money there.
40.9 in 15-16 that we originally envisaged.
Yeah.
And it was reduced down to 11
11.
during the year, and then it's been reduced again to 0 because we don't realise that
Right,
it's
so
not
this,
represented
what we have in the budget this year is the only monies at this point in time that will be in the
Yeah.
investment fund. Disappointing.
Well, 16-17, hopefully we'll start to see the actual outworkings of FTC in terms of the investment fund.
See, just in terms of the fresh start agreed by the executive, number of allocations, 10 million to tackle paramilitary activity, 12 million for shared future, 30 million in terms of dealing with the past. Is there any agreement where those issues are going to lie in terms of the respective departments, and what kind of budgetary impact will that have on next year and indeed the full Assembly term?
Well, the funding for those schemes are actually retained at the centre, and when issues are resolved, for example, when a paramilitary strategy is agreed, the funding will then be reallocated from the centre out to DOJ. Similarly with the shared future, the 12 million for the shared future that's held at the centre, when there's agreement on where that's going, it'll probably end up going to the executive office. So it won't actually impact in terms of a budgetary cut or an increase for other. It won't result in a budgetary cut for other departments because the money's held at the centre. But when it moves from the centre to the relevant departments, so for example, when the 10 million for paramilitaries moves from the centre to DOJ, it'll go into the DOJ baseline, so they will see an increase. But
So there's no time frame subject to political agreement?
yeah.
Also then, in terms of the flagship projects,
Yeah.
including obviously the A6 seems to be the one that make the headlines most recently. How are they going to impact on budgets? And obviously they're going to be part of the budget within
Yeah.
16, 17 and so on. So how will that affect those departments' respective ability to prioritise their capital budgets?
Well, the capital funding for those 6 specific projects have been built into the relevant departments' baselines. The key issue, the reason why they were designated as capital projects, was really to signal the intention of the executive to fast-track the delivery of those, so the relevant departments can actually start to plan and procure and deliver those now, rather than wait for the new incoming executive and new mandate to determine a 4-year budget after 16-17. Because, as you know, for example, developing the A6 or the A5, it's not a single-year hit in terms of the capital budget. It's across many, many years. So it's basically giving the green light to those projects now beyond the 16-17 budget what the executive was agreeing.
And then, in terms of additional revenue raising, this is something that we've been raising for quite some time. It's been discussed at the executive level, but there's no new proposals coming forward that I can see.
Well, the only significant revenue-raising issue in the 16-17 budget obviously was the increase to the rates. There were a number of issues considered by ministers, but I suppose the key issue there is that they were conscious of the fact that they were constructing a budget for a new incoming executive and assembly, which is why I just really create a platform for 1 year, and revenue-raising issues are undoubtedly something that the new executive and new assembly are going to have to tackle.
There's no sense at this stage that there's 2 or 3 ideas that may be adopted by the incoming executive, or?
No, well, as you know, there's a whole range of issues floating around and giving different priorities by different political parties, but it'll be for the new executive to ponder.
Just come in on that one, because that's one of the questions I had in mind to ask. At present, some departments are making commitments going forward as far as 2020.
On the capital side, yeah.
Will those automatically be approved, or is that really binding a future executive?
Yeah, well, the way it'll be, I presume it'll be presented in the new executive's budget considerations, that there are pre-commitments on the capital side, so they'll be built in as inescapable pressures to the capital side of those, for those 6 flagship projects. But we do that anyway as a norm in terms of constructing budgets. We take tails and capital projects from previous decisions and you build it in, because they're contractual commitments, you build it into the capital position that you start to establish for each of the departments going forward.
Inescapable has now been tarnished, no, I'm afraid, by some ministers. It's been their sort of pet project, and inescapable doesn't necessarily mean inescapable anymore.
Well, to say we're clear in DFP what our definition of inescapable is in terms of constructing a capital position.
Okay, members? All happy? All right, folks.
Okay,
Thank you very much again. Moving on to the next briefing then, members. Paper from DFP outlining the draft. The executive budget is at pages 57 to 60 of your main pack, and Assembly Research paper at pages 4 to 10 of the table packs. This is DFP's own budget we're looking at. Bridget, you're very welcome to the committee, and Ms. Janis Marinowski, you're very welcome as well. Bridget, you want to make an opening statement?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'd just like to make a few comments about the position that the department's in following the announcement of the 16-17 budget. Firstly, as I noted in the paper that you'll have in front of you, the headline figure of a 1% reduction for DFP doesn't fully show the position for most of the department. It doesn't take account of the fact that just over £4 million is needed for the implementation of the reduction in the corporation tax rate. And that means that in actual fact, the overall cut for the rest of the department is more like around about 4%. Once that's considered. Secondly, we need to consider the fact that the department has a high proportion of fixed costs. About 55% of what we spend is staff costs, and a further 42% is either contractually committed or is money that we need to spend in order to generate income. So effectively, if we didn't spend it, there would be an amount of income foregone that would balance it. So that doesn't really leave us with very much left in terms of discretionary spend. It's only around about 3%. And within our discretionary spend, and I might put inverted commas around that, there are a number of inescapable costs that we still need to fund. So, for example, I've already referred to the need to obviously do the implementation of corporation tax. But also we have a number of things we have to fund from discretionary expenditure that are fundamental to running the department and indeed to the running of other NICS departments. So things like the IT infrastructure, communications infrastructure, printing, postage, stationery, things that can be reduced but actually can't be reduced to zero, and the department continue to function in any sort of meaningful way. So actually we find ourselves in the position where further cuts would have left us with nowhere else really to go, and we would have had to have looked towards our ability to recharge some of our shared services to other departments in order to make the budget balance. I mean, so I think in terms of looking at the relatively small reduction to our department, that gives you a bit of context in terms of what we provide in terms of support to other departments, and actually an additional cut to our budget would simply have meant that costs would have ended up being passed around the system, in my view. So with that in mind, I'm happy to take questions.
I'm just going to ask the same question I asked Mike in terms of the department specifically. How challenging is the next financial year going to be?
Very challenging. It's on the cusp, as I say, of what was possible for us. We have got enough money to run the department next year, but just and very barely. And we are having to make use of a fifth tranche of the voluntary exit scheme in order to balance the budget next year. And the unknown in this really is exactly what impacts the loss of we will have lost by the time tranche 5 of the ES comes through. We estimate around 350 staff, which is about 10%, just over 10% of our staffing complement. Obviously, with such a large proportion of our budget being spent on staff, we've very little other option but to try and cut as far as we could into staff costs in order to make ends meet. But the outworkings of those staff not being around anymore have yet to be fully scoped out, because, as I say, we're only just looking at the impact of who's been programmed to leave under tranche 4, and we're still to wait to see exactly who goes under tranche 5.
And how is that impacting on the staff that are left behind? I mean, obviously, if there's less staff overall, you still have the same amount of responsibilities at the end of the day. So is there an increase in stress-related leave? And
I mean, again, it's a little bit too early to tell on that one, because as we stand at the moment, we've had 2 tranches of people go out of the full 5. I think we're still benefiting from the Christmas effect of, you know, the second tranche only left at the end of November, and we all had December, and, you know, the natural anticipation of Christmas and people preparing for Christmas leave. So I think it'll really only be as we sort of get settled back into the new year and the 3rd and 4th tranches leave that we'll start to see how that does impact on the staff who remain. I mean, obviously, across the department, we're looking at ways that we can restructure what we do to be able to do things more efficiently, and we're also looking at focusing on key priorities and where lesser priorities can be reduced. And we're also looking at things like our internal controls and recognising that maybe in the past we've been very cautious and we've taken a belt and braces approach to control in some cases, and looking therefore maybe at our risk appetite and looking at, you know, maybe the belt's enough, you know, maybe we don't need the braces as well.
But obviously, for such a significant reduction in staff, that would equate to a reduction in work space as well. So is there any savings that have been realised by that reduction?
Again, the outworkings of that in terms of actual cash releasing savings will take a while. We probably won't see them in 16-17, because what we need to do then is reconfigure where staff are, and as part of the restructuring of departments, we need to move staff around and then exit leases. So it would be great if we had leases that ended at exactly the right time for us to be able to stop paying for them at the time that we've moved the staff out. But the reality is that we'll have to wait until those leases come to an end. But we are working very strongly on the basis that we will not renew leases, and that staff will be moved and reaccommodated in existing accommodation, both through the accommodation that's freed up through staff leaving, and also by looking at how we can make better use and higher density in our existing buildings.
And how is the department going to change from going 12 departments to 9? What additional functions are you getting?
Very little. I think Colin had mentioned earlier in his briefing that there's actually a very small impact on this department. We're taking in a couple of small functions from the government, from OFM-DFM, one of which is the government advertising unit, and the other of which is the web development team, I think, who support the online aspect of NI Direct. The latter of those, the NI Direct web development team is already funded from DFP baseline. We actually transfer money every year to OFM DFM to fund that team, and the government advertising unit is funded through in-year budget transfers to OFM DFM. So in terms of the department's budget, that you actually see a virtually zero impact.
And many staff is that you're taking?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I know it's a relatively small number.
Less than 50?
I don't know. I wouldn't like to speculate, but I would guess it's less than 100 in any case, and quite possibly less than 50.
So we don't have the information yet.
In terms of corporation tax then, the £4 million funding for systems development, explain why it costs that amount of money.
HMRC are obviously run the overall tax collection system for the UK government, and we are in a position where we have no alternative but to buy the service from them, because to develop our own system would obviously be prohibitively expensive. We are challenging obviously the figures that have been provided to us by HMRC in terms of exactly the question you've asked, but at the end of the day, if we want to have a corporation tax system, we will have to pay what HMRC asks for us. We're in not a particularly strong position in terms of bargaining there, but we will certainly be challenging it. £4 million is an initial estimate, and as things develop and time goes on, we'll be able to probe that more deeply.
But given, we've discussed other issues here this morning in terms of what came out of the Fresh Start agreement, and those issues are being held at the centre. Why would the corporation tax not also be held at the centre until it's more concrete?
I'm afraid that would have been a question for Mike. Obviously, from my perspective, I wanted to ask for the money that I needed in order to deliver it, and I was fortunate enough to be given it. Obviously, if we can deliver it for less than the allocation, and that is above the de minimis limit, we will be returning it to the centre for reallocation.
Members?
Yep. Just to return to the voluntary exit scheme, Bridget, obviously there's a built-in saving this year.
Yes.
How much is it?
We had projected that the first 4 tranches would save us £10 million in 16-17. That would be the full year impact of the first 4 tranches. We are estimating a further saving of up to £1.5 million from a tranche 5, which obviously isn't a full year saving. That's what we estimate we might get from a June exit date, but we obviously don't know what the exact exit date will be for the 5th tranche yet.
It's likely to be the second half of the budget year.
No, sorry, it's likely that staff will exit by the end of June at the latest, we're being told, is when they will exit. So £1.5 million is the maximum I think we will get from a 3/4 of a year savings. Yeah.
Okay. So that's built into the budget. You talk there about the chair raised the question of asset management. In the ministerial statement, there's talk of property management. Is that the same thing?
Broadly, yes.
How does it differ then?
The executive's asset management strategy, I think, has more in it than just the DFP element of property. So one of the things it had in it was, for example, the collaborative procurement strategy. But I do tend to use it in a synonymous way, but the overarching executive's asset management strategy has more in it than just the DFP office estate management aspect of property.
So what do you expect to get from asset management and DFP in the budget year?
I don't know the answer to that actually exactly at the moment. I understand that the £1.5 million that's been allocated will be used to develop business cases around the rationalisation of the office estate. Now, there are departments who have office estate outside of DFP, so I will need to liaise with the Strategic Investment Board to clarify how much of that will impact on DFP's office estate as opposed to the office estate that currently sits with other departments.
Would that not have been necessary, though, before the budget figures were finalised?
Because the SIB have an overarching view of the entire office estate that the entire NICS owns as opposed to just the DFP one, they're in a very good position to understand how much money they need to allocate to that strategy, and they can then they will take a strategic view of it, and they will deploy that money to where it can best realise savings rather than looking at which department is benefiting from it. So from that perspective, I think it will avoid the inevitable potential for a department to focus solely on what would benefit their budget rather than looking at what would benefit the overall Northern Ireland budget as a whole, if that makes sense.
A bit of flexibility built in there by accident, is there?
I don't think by accident. I think it's deliberately been. I'm speculating here because obviously Mike would be better able to tell you exactly why it was done in the way it was done, but I would have thought that it's there deliberately to give the flexibility that's needed to point it towards the projects that will have most benefit.
Right, so it's really off budget at the moment. That's what.
As I understand it, it's still being held at the centre, that element.
Not in the list of things held at the centre.
Is it not? Okay. It's not in my budget, so I can't. It's not in my budget.
I'll take it up elsewhere.
No.
Yeah. Thanks.
You see, just in terms of the VES levers, what's the grade profile of those to date? Is there any particular grade that's been impacted on?
I don't have that information available actually with me at the moment. I know in DFP our first 4 tranches were prorated across all grades.
Yeah.
Now whether the acceptance.
Could we get a copy of those figures? Just
I'm sure we can request that.
Okay, Martin.
Thanks very much for your presentation information. A couple of quick questions. Of those who have left under the voluntary exit scheme, what has been the average payout? Do you know that?
I do have that figure with me. I think it's £38,800.
I was going to catch you out. Okay, I'd estimate there's around 40. So
I do have it in my briefing somewhere. Am I right? Yes, 38,800.
And that would confirms the figures I'm working on, that the voluntary access scheme is going to be way short of 20,000 people even under the voluntary access scheme, according to the money we have set aside and the average cost of departure to date. But that was one thing. The other 2 quick issues: the corporation tax of 4 million. Explain to the chair really why it's allocated to you. But what will that look like when it's spent? Is it software? Is it specialists? Is it? I mean, we're not going to end up with one of these sort of welfare schemes in Britain where the software didn't work for 300 years. So do we know what we're doing with this 4 million, do we?
It will go towards changes being made to the HMRC's existing system. So it will effectively be software development for HMRC.
So will those jobs be here or in London? That's what I mean. As
I understand it, the money will be spent on the HMRC system. So I would imagine it will be wherever HMRC is located.
And talk to me about the rate rebate, 2 million. Is that dependent upon the non-domestic rates review? Is that what that is, in case that changes? Or what?
No, that is to pay for the changes that we need to make to the system in relation to the introduction of universal credit.
Okay. Thank you.
Just, I mean, in terms of the VES, I think what would be useful for the committee would be if the department could give us a table outlining each of its business areas, including all provisions and contingent liabilities, i.e. those stated in the DFP annual report, and then to integrate into that the number of staff leaving and expected to leave under the VES, so we have a transparent picture of what areas are going to be most impacted by the voluntary exit scheme within the department.
Okay, just to give you a little bit of a flavour of why that's maybe not quite as straightforward as you've asked, we can give you a table quite easily of where the people have left. But obviously what we will be doing as a department over the coming months is looking at, if we've got a team of 20 people and 10 people have left from that team, that in fact, what we need to do is to look to another team that maybe hasn't had anybody leave and move people around the department. So whilst it's very easy for us to give you a table of where everybody left from, that won't necessarily be
Well, you could also include
entirely-
where you plan to introduce more staff to make up that deficit.
Yeah, and
So that information included within the table that we're requesting.
we can certainly have a look at that. That will take us a little bit more time because obviously we know where people are leaving from, but we're still working through the implications of who we need to move and where from and where to.
Yeah.
So the first thing we can do very quickly in respect of tranches 1 to 4, but the second piece will take some more time.
Well, if you can provide us the initial information for next week, that would be useful. In terms of the OECD review, what implications of that is there for the department and departmental budgets?
I'm afraid I'm unsighted as to what the outcome of that has been. I think you have a briefing scheduled, do you, with Colin Sullivan's team around that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have that information. I'm not aware of what's coming out of that review at this time.
There's no major budgetary impact that you're...
I'm not expecting it to have a major cost impact, as in more costs required in DFP's budget. Obviously, I would hope that ideas may be coming forward from that review that will help us to save money in the future, but whether they will be implementable in time for 16-17 will remain to be seen.
Just one last one, if I may, Chair, just on the personnel, you know, the VES again. Obviously, a lot of work was done at the beginning to consider, you know, how do we handle this? You just weren't going to wait until people left and say, gosh, there's a hole there. Is there, in fact, a personnel, a work plan, a strategy for how the VES is going to be handled?
Yes, we've... So... And I'm talking a little bit out of turn, obviously, because it's not my area, but at a high level, effectively what we've done is the first thing we've done is we've said to business areas, OK, the default position is if somebody goes, you look to do without them. The second thing you then do is if that person is, that post needs to be filled, you look to see, well, is there some lower priority work within your business area that can be ceased and somebody can be moved from within your business area to fill that post. The third part, and this is the part that we're still getting to at the moment, is to then take that up a notch and say, OK, business areas have done everything they can within their business area. What needs to be done at departmental level to move people from one part of the department to another to make sure that we're prioritising in the right way. So that's a broad, high-level indication of the way that the departments approach things.
Right, and that's okay standing back and looking at it objectively, but in reality, you will have had a plan. Whenever those people indicated they wished to leave, presumably someone updated the plan. So you did have prior notice?
We did have, yes, we would have, and obviously business areas, therefore, we knew who'd applied at the start of the scheme, and then, as you say, we've had, I think it's about 2 months' notice as a business area of who's definitely leaving in order to make plans around that. But obviously things take time to work through. I mean, I know in my own area, certain posts that I'm looking at and I'm going, OK, well, we'll see if we can manage without that. But, you know, if in a couple of months' time, we're finding that that's not working, that we may need to go back and revise that. I mean, I think that I would imagine this has been said to you by colleagues previously. The VES was not a strategic HR intervention. The VES was a budget reduction tool.
Yes, but I would hope that the other would have gone hand in hand with it.
Well, I mean...
It's reality, isn't it?
It is reality, but the reality also is that the timeframes didn't allow us to do what you would do in a planned strategic HR intervention, so we are not doing it in the ideal way that you would do it if you had the time that you needed in order to look at what way you wanted to restructure your business before staff left. We're not in that place. We're in a place where we're having to do the two things, partly in tandem and partly where the strategic piece is coming behind the exits.
Okay. Okay, members. All right, Bridget, Janice, thank you both very much indeed. Can members can seek agreement to send the 2 applicable Assembly research papers to the Department for written response? Agreed.
Yep.
To take members' views on whether they have any residual issues that they wish to raise with the Department, either the draft EFP budget or the wider executive budget for 16-17, bearing in mind the Minister's comments in relation to the normal consultation procedures not being adhered to on this occasion. Members content. Moving on to subordinate legislation, the Public Service, Civil Service and Others Pensions Consequential Provisions Amendment Regulations NI 2015, pages 62 to 70 of the main pack has been laid in the Business Office by the Department for formal consideration, subject to affirmative resolution. We can inform members that at committee on the 9th of December we considered the initial proposal and members were content. The Department confirmed there has been no changes to overall policy. The Examiner Statutory Rules report was published and is included at page 12. No points about the rule have been raised by way of technical scrutiny. Members content. But the question that the committee has considered the Public Service, Civil Service and Others Pensions Consequential Provisions Amendment Regulations NI 2016 and recommends that it be affirmed by the Assembly. Agreed. Can I refer members to the rates, Regional Rates Order NI 2016, pages 72 to 73. Again, affirmative resolution. Can I advise members that Brian is on standby should they be required to come to the table to address any queries on this or any other proposals on rating. Are members happy with this one?
This is the sports bodies we're talking about first, Chair.
This first one is the regional rates order.
Okay.
Members content? Okay. Put the question. The committee has considered DFP's proposal for subordinate legislation under the Regional Rates Order NI 2016 and has no objection to the policy implications of the proposed legislation at this stage. Agreed. The rates exemption for ATMs in rural areas Order NI 2016, pages 75 to 77, subject to affirmative resolution. Members content? Agreed. Put the question. The committee has considered DFP's proposal for subordinate legislation under the rates exemption for automatic telling machines in rural areas Order NI 2016 and has no objection to the policy implications of proposed legislation at this stage. Agreed.
Agreed.
The rates temporary rebate amendment order can refer members to pages 79 to 81. Again, subject to affirmative resolution. Members okay with this one?
Yes, Chair, it's going to call for debate as part of the rates review, but yes, it makes sense to extend it.
Okay, I put the question then that the committee has considered DFP's proposal for subordinate legislation under the SL1, the rates temporary rebate amendment order NI 2016 and has no objection to the policy implications of the proposed legislation at this stage. Agreed?
Agreed.
That concludes that part of our meeting. Moving on then to the NAMA review. Thanks again, Brian.
An easy one.
Correspondence and next steps. Bell and Company briefing paper and service letter, pages 83 to 105. Cormac Butler correspondence, page 106 to 108. Correspondence from John J. Rice and Company Solicitors, most recent one, pages 109 to 110. Email from John J. Rice and Company Solicitors regarding Frank Cushnan, page 111. Letter to the committee, letter from the committee to John J. Rice and Co-Solicitors, pages 112 to 117. Response from NAMA to CFP, letter of the 14th of December regarding interested parties at pages 118 to 120 of the main pack. And response from Fortress, dated the 11th of January 2016 at page 17 of your table and packs. Just to start with the Bell and Company briefing papers, these were circulated to members who attended yesterday's meeting of the ETI committee and a copy to other members for information. Can I seek agreement to publish this on the web page in line with previous agreements?
Yes. Chair, how did was there anything interesting come out of yesterday's once the ETI committee got their internal and where you were sitting? Difficulties sorting
Well, it kept me seat anyway. I think it was interesting, but I don't think it was anything surprising. I think
he didn't get promoted as much as Morris.
Nothing new there, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Nothing new. So we've agreed to cooperate with the committee on any other issues that may be forthcoming. But Martin, you were
well, Chair, I think
the duration.
as Lord Morrow in his parting shot said that he was hopeful the Finance Minister would meet Bell & Co and maybe some of their clients. I don't know at that point. I presume at that point he didn't know who the Finance Minister was going to be. And I think that would be an important meeting. I thought they made a strong case. And it was a case for a different group of people we haven't heard from. These are the people who found themselves caught in debt. Mr. Bell mentioned 5 million under, but some of them is for $1 million. Those are big sums, but they're a lot less than some of the 500 millions we've been looking at. The one thing it flags up for me, Chair, is that we really need to compel Cerberus to come here. Ian stepped out, but Ian makes the point we need to wind up our NAMA investigation for this mandate anyway. Who knows what will be in other futures, but as part of that, the gap, the Banco's ghost, I believe they call it, is Cerberus, and we really should compel them to come. There's been enough asking, but I think we need to use our powers to compel Cerberus to appear before us. It remains the big gap, and we should certainly try that. I'm more convinced than ever after hearing Bell & Co yesterday.
Any other views?
How are you going to do that, Chair? Voters aren't going to play ball either.
Chair, the committee has, just to remind members, committees previously get legal advice on compelling different witnesses, so that can be refreshed if the committee wished to look at that. Or an ETI committee has agreed to invite Cerberus in the context of its current operations to that committee as well yesterday. So it's just
Just remind us again, we had invited Cerberus, and then
Initially, the committee had invited Cerberus in terms of its current operations in Northern Ireland, and it had asked for that to be in closed session. It had agreed to come, but it would be in closed session. The committee went back and said that it wanted part of it in open session. That had been agreed, a date had been set, and then the NAMA review kicked off, and then Cerberus declined in the context of the ongoing NCA investigation to come to the committee, but agreed to respond to questions in writing, and made a submission to written questions from the committee. So that's where it stands, Chair, in terms of the NAMA review.
I think as well as that, we need to invite the NCA back to the committee. We haven't heard from them for a number of months now, and certainly the public, I think, would like to know whether the investigation is getting anywhere or is going to get anywhere. Are they going to reach conclusions in regard to the investigation shortly, or is this going to drag on for a considerable period of time? I think that is something we should seek to establish.
Are they likely to tell us any of that?
Well, they may. I mean, they did give us some indication in closed session last time of where this may go and when.
Chair, the last two meetings, it was private meetings, not part of a formal committee meeting. It was private meetings. The last one, there were representatives from each party attended that.
Am I right in thinking, Chair, that the information I give to you, and I wasn't at that meeting, I was representative from each party, they're still within that timeline? I mean, they haven't, it's not that at this stage the private briefing the NCA give you, which included a timeline and their approach, still within that, or are they not?
Well, to be fair, there always is that caveat that it's subject to many variable factors. But I think, given what was discussed at the last meeting, it's clear that we now need an update on where things are going.
Just to be clear, Chair, would you proposing we approach them for the same type of closed meeting with a rep from each party, or ask them in committee?
Chair, I think certainly in the lines of the previous meetings, it was a private meeting, not part of a committee meeting with party.
You can't get the information you're looking for in the public.
No, well, that's content with that. I wasn't just clear what the Chair was suggesting.
Okay. Members content then with that approach in terms of Martin's proposal and the proposal to invite the NCA?
Yep. Yeah. Yes, Chair.
Correspondence then from Cormac Butler, pages 106 to 108. I'm going to take a look at this. There's a lack of clarity in this. And I'm taken from this that Mr. Butler works for Whelan Solicitors. makes a number of interesting points. The members have any views on this? There's also attached to that a letter from Phelan Solicitors, East Douglas Street, Douglas, Cork, making reference to Gareth Graham, and there's a document schedule on page 108, on which it is highlighted a document stating the ownership of the beneficial interest in loans allegedly acquired by NAMA from Bank of Ireland did not legally transfer to NAMA. This amounts to one document. So I don't know if members have any views on this or an interpretation of what's being presented there.
Well, sure, I'm declaring an interest in relation to Graham's, but I have no idea what this is about. I don't understand it. So perhaps you do. No, we don't.
I mean, at no point can I see, do they wish to speak to the committee or do they wish to submit further evidence? So perhaps we should write back to Mr. Butler.
Which page is this in the pack?
Sorry, it's page 106 to 108. Just to clarify.
Sorry, it's something should just be noted. Yeah.
I think we should write back to him, Martin, just to seek further information in case there's something in it. Okay, agreed. Okay. Correspondence from and to John J. Rice at pages 109 and 111. To seek agreement to publish this correspondence on the committee web pages in line with previous agreements. Members, any views on this one?
The chair comes down to the same issue. I think we really need to compel Mr. Cushnan to come to us as well. Maybe Shane can advise on that. But these are issues that the NCA investigation may cross. But I'm happy to take advice.
Well, members agreed that we look at that in terms of legal advice first,
Of course.
and then make a decision. But I think it's unfortunate that Mr. Cushnan could not have answered the many questions that we have put to him in writing. I mean, obviously there's 39 questions there. His name has come up time and time again in terms of the evidence that we received from ministers, from respective businesses and officials. So there are a number of questions there that he should be able to answer without any difficulty. So it's unfortunate that he has chosen not to cooperate with this committee. I don't know specifically why. He's made a number of allegations in his letter through John J. Rice and Company Solicitors. But at the end of the day, this was an opportunity for Mr. Cushnan to clarify a number of points and indeed clear up some of the allegations that were being made about him. And he has chosen not to take up that opportunity. So members, I'm sure, will have their own views on that. NAMA correspondence then at page 118 to 120 of your packs. And in this, Mr. Frank Daly is confirming that NAMA had no knowledge of meetings between Mr. Cushnan and prospective purchasers of NAMA secured assets in the north, and had no knowledge of Mr. Cushnan's representation of individuals or companies whose loans had transferred to NAMA. So more questions again for Mr. Cushnan. Unfortunately, we're not going to get a response to them, but I think that there is also an issue of great concern, certainly to myself.
Are we not in a position, Chair, to compel Mr. Are we not in a better position to compel Mr. Cushnan to attend than, say, Cerberus?
Or
Well, we should investigate that now anyway, and depending on the legal advice and other factors, we should look at that and make a decision in due course. But certainly, given the letter from Frank Daly, that they had no knowledge of some of the meetings that did take place or were alleged to have taken place involving Mr. Cushnan, I think that's deeply worrying. And indeed, Mr. Cushnan has an opportunity to address the major concerns that the committee have, and hopefully he changes his mind and cooperates with this committee rather than choosing to ignore the questions that are being put to him. Any other points before I move on? Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Just on this, obviously we're against the clock now. I'm hearing that, but after St Patrick's Day, that's probably the week after that, is probably going to be our last week in this place before the Assembly dissolves ahead of the election. What then is the time frame? Obviously, any timetable depends on further witnesses that we call or extra work that we want to do. But in terms of a report being drafted by this committee, do we have a time frame in mind of when that will be completed for?
It would be subject to what kind of report the committee wants. I mean, it may be the case that the report is simply the evidence that we've gathered, or we may want to make a series of recommendations. So that's an option. I suppose also another option is to conclude that the committee can't reach conclusive recommendations around this, given that there are gaps that we haven't been able to make, and the committee may or may not recommend that the new committee and the new Assembly after may want to take up this issue as well. I think, personally speaking, that would be something that I would want to see, especially if there's no cooperation from certain witnesses. And again, given the fact that the NCA investigation is still alive, then maybe a committee, the new Finance Committee and the new Assembly, may want to take this issue up once the NCA has concluded its investigations. So there's a number of options before members in that regard.
So, are we compelled? Do we have to put a report out of some sort? I take it.
Chair,
some conclusion to
the actual terms of reference for the review, the outputs that were set out in the terms of reference, I'll just read that out. So the intention is that the review will result in, so it's a fact-finding review, will result in an evidence base and public record of factual information arising from the committee's fact-finding in relation to its objectives. As part of the fact-finding, the committee will also seek to establish a timeline of events, meetings and correspondence. So the output didn't specifically say there would be a report, because it's a fact-finding review. If there's a report and analysis of facts and conclusions and recommendations, that goes maybe beyond in terms of the terms of reference. But the timeline that the committee has been producing and is updating all the time, which runs to 100-odd pages at this point in time, sets out the facts of who, what, when, where. So just
the fact that we have already done that, we are keeping in with the terms of reference.
That's right. And there's also,
so there isn't any requirement.
There's also a published evidence base that the committee has been updating almost every week of all the papers received. So just draw that to members' attention in terms of, and this was in the context of the ongoing investigation, and the committee took legal advice in its terms of reference and including in terms of what outputs would come from the process. So.
It's just, I think it's a little bit odd, and I understand the chair obviously feels that he hasn't got all the evidence and spoken to all the people he might want to. But I think if we were to bring all this evidence together, obviously that would be good. But to start again in the new mandate, obviously it's not a decision for us to make now, but that would obviously be something very different, I think. Not that it's us for deciding what even form would that take. I think we do need to bring this to some sort of a conclusion. Obviously, in the next mandate, whoever's returned to this place is up to them to investigate any matter that they want. But I think that we need to say, at some point, here's the evidence that we have gathered here. Is we've set out to do what we wanted to do, and bring some sort of closure at some point to this at this stage, regardless of what happens afterwards. And do we just stop adding to our evidence? Or do we have a date in mind where we say, here's where we finally want to bring this all together?
Any other members?
Chair, to do that, what Mr. Lyons is saying, I think you do need some sort of conclusion and full stop and report of some type. Can't end in a vacuum. What happens in the new mandate is up to the new mandate, and none of us can see the future in relation to this particular sort of the NAMA service scandal. But I've agreed with Ian previously that it needs to come to a conclusion at some time. Perhaps if Mr. Lyons is saying we need to say here's where we are, and I've reached some conclusions, and I'm happy to air those, whether it's with the agreement of all the committee or we disagree on some of the points, whatever. But I do think that Shane, it might be helpful if you come back and said, well, look, if we wanted to put a full stop down, we would need to take steps. This would be the timeline, and certainly I'm putting on record that service should be compelled to come here, that they have played a waiting game deliberately to try and stymie this committee, and it's important to me that we try and compel them. And that would be the only question mark I would have over reaching the conclusion and reaching a start and end point. Mr. Lyons suggests if service were to play that dirty game and this dirty scheme of refusing to come here to answer the questions that have come up. But other than that, I'm happy, Chair. Mr. Lyons says that whatever happens in the new mandate, and I have no doubt this will be of major interest, but that's up for a different group. I'm happy to look, Shane, at where that full stop would go. I presume there won't be a meeting after St. Patrick's Day. It's the Easter recess, isn't it?
Just for clarity on that, I'm not necessarily saying that we do need to have a report, but I think it would be good to say, here's the point at which we have stopped, here's the evidence that we have gathered. I'm not making any proposal or saying that we have to come to any conclusions on that.
Surely that is a report. Oh,
I suppose we're just debating. It's not necessarily. I suppose a report would be a document which adds some meat to the evidence that is already there. I'm saying, the evidence gathering, yes, we can call it a report, but I'm not saying we need to make further comment necessarily on the evidence that we have gathered, if that is outside of the terms of reference.
Chair, if the committee's content, we can draw up a factual report setting out what the committee, its original terms of reference, what the committee has done, the evidence it's gathered, the vast number of documents that the committee has put into the public domain, the timeline, and then if there's still evidence to be taken, it can set out what further evidence, or the evidence the committee hasn't been able to gather, and in that factual way, as a kind of a concluding document.
Sounds reasonable to me. In other words, we'll work up as far as we can go and set out where we left the situation.
I mean, at this point, we can't proceed with that until we've concluded our oral evidence sections or written evidence for that.
Can I ask
so we still have to
through yourself, ask the Secretariat, how long it would take them to prepare an account of the review to date? How long that process would take?
Well, this is, Chair, we can prepare a factual report along the lines outlined there within the next few weeks and bring a draft to committee in good time before.
Well, we have only about 7 to 8 weeks left. So you saying it would take 2-3 weeks?
Yeah. Now, as I say, that would be a factual report. It won't be analysing the evidence and drawing conclusions or recommendations. It will be setting out the work of the committee, what the committee outputs from the committee's review, and with web links to the timeline and other documents.
We need to get that done as soon as possible if we're to leave ourselves time to call further witnesses if needs be.
But I think, in terms of the conclusions, I think we should reach some conclusions where possible. I mean, given some of the non-cooperation of some of these witnesses, I think we should be reaching conclusion. The committee which will concern some of the lack of cooperation of certain witnesses. I think that's something that should be done, and whereas we can't reach far-reaching conclusions, or certainly doesn't look that to be the case at this stage, I think there are certain areas which we should look at, which I believe we should get consensus from the entire committee on some of the issues that I'm considering, because there maybe is a public expectation there as well, that given the amount of time and effort and arguing that we've invested into this particular report, that we should reach some sort of conclusions that departments and even the wider community, the business community perhaps should take into account as well, and the banking community too. So I think that should be something we should consider and move forward on the basis of consensus with that. I'm not referring to anything that would be divisionary. But there's a number of other issues just to go through here about...
In respect to the legal advice that we're requesting, is that in respect of whether we have the power to compel? 'Cause if my memory serves me correct, given it wasn't our responsibility and it was another jurisdiction, what powers do we have to compel people? So is that we're checking in respect of further legal advice?
Well, that I remember the advice to which you refer, but I think that was NAMA in that case, because Service would have a base in the north and staff in the north, so would be more compellable.
Can we check that?
So there'd be different. The legal advice will be specific to different witnesses. So in terms of what was discussed today, so Cerberus and Mr. Cushnan, so it would be legal advice looking specifically at those two. Is that correct?
Okay, can I remind members that at our meeting on the 3rd of December, we'd agreed to proceed with oral evidence sessions with the former Minister Simon Hamilton, Mr. Waters, Mr. Rowntree, Dr. O'Hagan, Mr. Bullock and Mr. Muskelly. Also agreed to write again to Mr. Brendan McGinn, Andrew Creighton and the Lagan Group, reiterating the invitation to provide evidence in relation to the review and ask them to respond by a specified deadline, and to write to all the other parties previously invited to give oral evidence to the committee, advising that their evidence is no longer required. Can I advise members that following that decision we received evidence from Mr. Bullock and Dr. O'Hagan, and follow-up communication was issued to the other witnesses accordingly. Can I also advise members that, as agreed, a revised and up-to-date timeline on the NAMA sale prepared by research will be published on the committee webpage, and this can take account of any relevant documents which the committee agrees to publish today. Just in terms of the other outstanding witnesses, remind members that Mr. David Waters has declined to give evidence to the committee due to the ongoing NCA investigation. Members content if we ask Mr. Waters if he would be prepared to answer written questions instead? Agreed. Can I advise members that committee staff emailed Mr. Simon Hamilton on the 4th of December asking for his availability to brief the committee, and a response remains outstanding. So I think we should email Mr. Hamilton again. He may be the only witness we have left to see on this list, so it would be important that we conclude in that evidence session. Can I advise members of the committee staff also emailed Mr. Brian Rowntree asking for his availability. He has not responded to date either. Also, in terms of John Muskelly, an oral briefing was due and was postponed due to his ill health. Committee staff have since tried to contact Mr. Muskelly but without success. Can I refer members to correspondence from Fortress on behalf of Brendan McGinn at page 17 of the tabled pack. They have declined to give oral or written evidence, citing the ongoing investigation by the NCA. Response also remains outstanding in terms of Andrew Creighton and Lagan Group have not responded either.
Just in terms of Lagan Group, we just discovered yesterday that the reminder was misdirected. There's a number of Lagan Group companies, so we'll reissue that to the corrected rate.
Okay, so Lagan Group will have an opportunity to respond to that. So any other points then before we move off this? Members content? On to correspondence then.
Okay, Chair. There are a number of papers and correspondence, Chair, that will be considered in the scheduled evidence sessions in the coming weeks, and various strategic issues. So I'll just draw out items requiring committee decisions. Page 1, 2, 3 of the pack. There's a DFP consultation on the pre-2002 civil service widowers pension arrangements. It's just the department's going out to consult. If the committee wishes to request a summary of the consultation responses, are provided when available. Members content with that, Chair? Then Piece 4 and Interreg 5 programmes. The department has sent updates, very detailed documents from pages 137 to 395 of the main pack. There is a scheduled briefing on all of this on the 3rd of February, so it's really for noting in the meantime, but the department has asked this committee to circulate the papers out to the other, there's various other committees have an interest in these programmes as well, so if members are content that we send those papers out to the other committees.
Great.
There's a page 408 to 409 of the main pack, DFP correspondence in relation to a Treasury consultation on the repayment of public sector exit payments. Members will recall that there was an LCM, legislative consent motion, previously on this issue, which set a threshold of £100,000, and also the committee supported the LCM but felt maybe the threshold could be lower, and also had concerns around people who received redundancy payments and were perhaps in some parts of the public sector. The committee had identified maybe the need to tighten that up in terms of closing that loop. So actually Treasury consultation is taking those issues forward, it would seem. So if members are content to receive a written briefing from DFP on the outcome of the Treasury consultation in advance of any further LCM on this issue.
Members agreed.
There's correspondence from DFP in relation to the OFM-DFM committee is preparing a report on European priorities, and this committee asked DFP for a response to inform the committee's submission to OFM-DFM committee. That's at page 438 to 440. There are some pages, I think 5 pages missing from the DFP response, but there will be a draft committee response prepared for committee's consideration next week. It's just for noting in the meantime. Then there's also correspondence from the Westminster Public Administration and Consultation Affairs Committee in relation to an inquiry it's conducting into interinstitutional relationships. That's at page 513 to 514 of the main pack. This is relevant to the Finance Committee's work in terms of the report in the Barnett Formula had identified concerns and issues around intergovernmental relations, and specifically in terms of block grant adjustments. So if the members are content, we could forward the extracts from the committee's report on the Barnett Formula to that committee for information. So we have a submission to the Barrack.
Great.
There's correspondence from the Women's Support Network that Michaela Boyle forwarded to me, page 522 to 526. It's a budget query around the Women's Centre's Childcare Fund. Members are content to forward it to DFP for a direct response to the correspondent.
Yep.
And then finally, there's correspondence from DFP in relation to the Memorandum of Understanding on Corporation Tax, which DFP has drawn up between DFP and Treasury. That's it, including in relation to IT systems. It's at pages 119 to 27 of the table pack. There is if members are content, there's a briefing scheduled on the evolution of fiscal powers before the end of mandate, if members are content to include that in that departmental briefing.
Great.
There are also various other routine papers that were sent to members by way of email on the 11th of January, but that's all the correspondence or decisions.
Board work programme, page 528 to 531. Members content it's updated to reflect decisions made today. Agreed. Other business. Next meeting will be Wednesday 20th at 10 a.m.
30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.